After Queen Elizabeth's private residence was handed over to Lady Louise, Camilla's family erupted in anger and disbelief, and that single action shifted the balance of the monarchy. But what Lady Louise did next changed everything. On the 28th of January 2026, Clarence House released a statement that no one saw coming. The announcement was brief, almost understated, yet its impact rippled across the United Kingdom within minutes. For generations, rumors had swirled about forgotten royal lands tucked away beyond public view. Now, for the first time, the palace confirmed that one of those long-whispered properties was real, and it no longer belonged to the crown. The surprise was not only about the estate itself, but about who had received it. It was given to the soft-spoken 22-year-old Lady Louise, the granddaughter of Queen Elizabeth II, who had become the sole owner of a secluded Highland retreat that very few people even knew existed. Those inside royal circles had referred to it only in coded language. To the outside world, it had never been named at all. So which property was that? Keep watching to find out. The property in question is known privately among trusted aides as Grey House. It lies deep in the Scottish Highlands, not far from the sweeping hills of the Cairngorms. The Grey House spread across roughly 200 acres of rugged countryside. It sits far from main roads, shielded by woodland and moor. There are no tourist signs pointing the way. No guidebooks list it. Satellite images reveal little more than a slate-roofed structure blending into the misty landscape. This was never meant to be a showpiece like Balmoral. It was something else entirely. The land was quietly secured in 1952. Shortly after Elizabeth ascended the throne. Instead of being registered in her royal capacity, the purchase was made through a discreet holding arrangement connected to the estate of the Queen Mother. That decision ensured the retreat would remain outside routine royal records. It was designed to be personal, not ceremonial. Former staff members have since described it as the late Queen's refuge, a place where schedules paused and formalities dissolved.
Why do we always go round and round when we want to talk?
There, she could read government documents without cameras waiting outside the gates. She could walk alone, wrapped in a simple coat and headscarf, free from the weight of expectation. It was a corner of Scotland where she was not the sovereign, but simply Elizabeth. Not every member of the family shared her affection for it. Prince Philip, who reportedly found the climate too harsh and preferred more comfortable surroundings. Princess Anne and Prince William would occasionally visit the nearby countryside for riding and field sports, but rarely stayed overnight. Prince Edward is said to have stopped by only once. Even King Charles III never developed a connection to the house. The isolation made it easy to overlook, and later, difficult to claim. That distance became significant in the weeks before the public announcement. According to insiders, quiet efforts had been made by members of Queen Consort Camilla's wider family to explore legal pathways toward the estate. Advisors were consulted. Land experts were brought in to examine old boundaries. Yet the attempt ultimately faltered. The retreat was protected by a private arrangement established decades earlier, and its ownership had already been decided. What makes Grey House remarkable is not its stone walls or sweeping views. It is what rests inside. Behind its modest doors lies a collection unlike any other in royal possession. Boxes of handwritten journals, carefully labeled envelopes of correspondence, film reels and audio recordings stored in protective cases. None of it was entered into the official royal archives. None of it was intended for public exhibition. The materials span decades. Letters exchanged with world leaders, reflections written after pivotal historic events, personal thoughts never filtered through advisors or speechwriters. There are recorded messages addressed to grandchildren, meant to be opened at meaningful stages in their lives. These are not political documents. They are intimate fragments of a woman who balanced duty with private emotion. Under long-standing archival protections, reigning monarchs may designate certain personal materials to remain outside institutional control. Once assigned to a named heir, those items cannot be absorbed into state collections or reclaimed by future sovereigns. In this case, the beneficiary was unmistakably clear: Lady Louise. But what made Lady Louise to be the heir to this property will surprise you. The moment Lady Louise was given the property shocked everyone because no one outside a small circle ever expected the responsibility to fall to her. She had never chased headlines, never angled for influence, never positioned herself as central to the future of the monarchy. Yet the roots of that decision stretched back years to a bond formed far from cameras and ceremony. Between 2018 and 2021, while much of the royal family divided time between public duties and private pursuits, Lady Louise quietly spent extended stretches in the Scottish Highlands. At Clarence house, she often remained long after cousins and relatives returned south. Those months were not filled with grand events or glittering dinners. They were quiet days shaped by routine. She joined her grandmother on early walks through heather-covered slopes. They shared tea by the fire when Highland rain pressed against the windows. In the evenings, they sat together in the study, sorting through boxes of documents few people had seen. These were not state papers prepared for historians. They were personal reflections, drafts of letters, and old photographs, carefully wrapped in tissue. Louise did not treat the task like an assignment. She listened. She asked thoughtful questions. Most importantly, she respected silence. A former member of staff later described her presence as steady rather than showy. She did not try to impress. She did not speak for effect. She simply offered attention without expectation. That quality, unnoticed by the public, mattered deeply to the late monarch. Observers who knew the family well say the Queen recognized familiar traits in her granddaughter. There was a thoughtful intelligence and a deep interest in history paired with restraint. Where others might have seen access as opportunity, Louise saw responsibility. The Queen valued that difference. In autumn 2021, shortly after the funeral of Prince Philip, a quiet legal step was taken. Without fanfare or announcement, a private deed was executed to secure the future of the hidden Highland retreat, known internally as Grey House. The measure ensured the estate would remain outside the reach of institutional reshuffling or political scrutiny. The document included strict provisions. Ownership would not transfer until designated trustees had passed away. The property would remain shielded from parliamentary examination and Crown estate absorption. Most controversially, specific branches of the extended family were permanently denied any claim or access rights. Within palace circles, the arrangement earned a discreet nickname, Article 31, a subtle reference to a meaningful date in the Queen's reign. Only a handful of individuals were aware of its existence: her legal advisor, Princess Anne, her senior archivist, and Prince Edward. Each understood the sensitivity of the matter. None spoke of it beyond necessary counsel. At that time, Queen Camilla remained unaware that any such safeguard had been established. By 2024, however, subtle inquiries began to circulate. They were never framed as direct questions about Grey House. Instead, discussions surfaced regarding whether all royal holdings had been fully accounted for within duchy disclosures. It was a careful strategy. Direct confrontation would have raised suspicion. Procedural curiosity seemed safer. Those close to the situation suggest Camilla understood that her long-term influence would differ from that of Queen Elizabeth II. She would not command the same historic authority. If she wished to anchor her legacy within the royal landscape, she would need enduring symbols, places, patronages, projects that carried weight beyond ceremony. On January 21, 2026, the matter reached a turning point. During a private discussion at Brickhall, the Scottish residence of Prince Charles III, a proposal was presented. The suggestion was framed as collaborative stewardship, transforming the secluded estate into a center for cultural preservation, environmental research, and literary residencies. Plans mentioned conservation grants, architectural restoration, and limited heritage tourism. On the surface, it sounded constructive, sustainable development paired with philanthropic oversight. Yet some insiders questioned the underlying objective. Stewardship would have meant influence. Influence would have meant proximity, both geographic and symbolic, to one of the late Queen's most private refuges. Even before formal approval was sought, preliminary assessments had reportedly taken place. Environmental consultants visited the Highlands. Financial outlines were drafted. Strategic options were sketched quietly. When the proposal reached the king, he did not dismiss it immediately. Instead, he requested reviews. Legal counsel revisited archival agreements. Estate officials examined ownership records dating back to the early 1950s. Meetings were postponed under the guise of due diligence. Then, on January 26, a small gathering was convened. Present were the king, his principal private secretary, and 2 constitutional advisors. After reviewing the findings, the conclusion was delivered with characteristic restraint. The estate, he said, was not subject to reassignment, neither now nor in the future. The statement was composed and courteous. It referenced a prior private settlement beyond Crown jurisdiction. No further explanation was offered. The name of Lady Louise was not mentioned. The existence of Article 31 remained undisclosed. To outside observers, the exchange appeared routine. Within palace walls, its meaning was unmistakable. A line had been drawn years earlier, and it would not be crossed. Those present later described the atmosphere as calm but decisive. The king's tone carried finality without confrontation. The legal framework left no room for negotiation. When the meeting concluded, Camilla reportedly maintained composure, yet she understood that something significant lay beneath the surface, an arrangement set in motion long before her inquiries began. And in that quiet realization, the truth edged closer to becoming public. So, keep on watching because this is where it gets really interesting. 72 hours after the tense meeting in Scotland, the confirmation arrived. On a crisp January morning in 2026, Buckingham Palace issued a carefully worded notice that carried enormous weight. The secluded Highland retreat, long whispered about in private circles, had not been assigned to a trust, nor divided among senior royals. It had been granted in full to Lady Louise Windsor, not to her father, Prince Edward, not to a foundation, not under joint custodianship, to her alone. The late Queen Elizabeth II had finalized her private testament in the autumn of 2021, just weeks after marking a deeply personal anniversary of her reign. That document, sealed under long-established legal protections, named her granddaughter as the sole and unrestricted proprietor of the estate, known internally as Grey House. The bequest included everything attached to it: the land itself, the residence, its contents, the archival materials stored within, the employment agreements of the small permanent staff, and most crucially, the authority to deny any request for public access. One sentence in the will, simple and unmistakable, captured the Queen's intention. The property was to remain a sanctuary, not a spectacle. Those who had known her well said it reflected her character perfectly, measured, deliberate, and immune to pressure.
It is perhaps worth reflecting that at the heart of the word Parliament,
She had always drawn a firm distinction between what belonged to the institution and what belonged to her as a person. For members of the extended Parker Bowles circle, the announcement felt seismic. Plans had already begun to form quietly around the Highlands. Preliminary conversations about culinary festivals and heritage collaborations had taken place. There had even been exploratory discussions about seasonal events celebrating regional produce within driving distance of the estate. Within hours of the palace statement, those conversations got more intense. The will had closed every door. Inside royal circles, disbelief spread first, then frustration. Some had assumed the retreat would eventually be folded into broader stewardship. Others believed it might remain dormant under shared management. Instead, the late monarch had drawn a final boundary and made it legally unbreakable. Calls were made to legal advisors across London and beyond. The response was consistent. The testament had been drafted with precision. There was no procedural weakness, no interpretive loophole. The structure shielded the gift from challenge.
Charge about. It was all very sort of laid back and happy, and we used to go off.
At the center of the storm stood Queen Camilla, reckoning with a reality that years of dedication to royal duty could not alter. Service did not equate to inheritance. Influence did not override private intent. But here comes the twist. You see, while others reacted to the news, Lady Louise herself had not been caught unprepared. Months earlier, in the summer of 2025, residents near Glenmore had noticed a young woman arriving quietly in the region. She wore simple outdoor clothing, traveled without entourage, and was accompanied by only one discreet protection officer. When locals struck up conversation, She mentioned academic research into Highland land management and ecology. In truth, her visits had a deeper purpose. Under the guidance of 2 retired archival specialists and a senior constitutional advisor, she was learning the mechanics of stewardship. She reviewed preservation protocols for fragile letters. She studied estate administration, from payroll systems to land use compliance. She examined the delicate balance between privacy law and succession rights. One mentor later remarked that she approached the responsibility not as a privilege, but as an obligation. She asked careful questions. She took meticulous notes. She understood that ownership of Grey House meant guardianship of memory. When the transfer officially activated, there were no public ceremonies. The change appeared first as a quiet update in the National Land Registry database. Only days later did the palace confirm what had already taken effect. The impact was profound. Lady Louise was no longer simply a reserved young royal pursuing her studies. She had become custodian of a personal historical archive beyond the reach of ministers, trustees, or even reigning sovereigns. Symbolically, she now held authority in one domain that operated independently of court hierarchy: legacy. She did not reach that point alone. Her most steadfast supporter throughout the transition was Princess Anne. Practical and unsentimental, Anne oversaw the operational side of the transfer with quiet efficiency. Staff salaries were maintained through a heritage framework she supervised. Sensitive documents were relocated under secure conditions. During a private gathering in Scotland, she personally handed Louise a sealed envelope containing the final authorization codes for the estate's internal security system. When procedural questions later surfaced through informal channels, Anne's response was brief and decisive. The wishes of a sovereign, once legally enacted, were not subject to reinterpretation. Louise's mother, Sophie, Duchess of Edinburgh, played a subtler but equally important role.
The Governor-General, Your Excellency, and the Prime Minister for your invitation to come and join you today in what is evidently...
Rather than engage in visible confrontation, she worked behind the scenes. Financial audits targeting Louise's holdings were reviewed and deflected where appropriate. Potential leaks regarding the estate's location were intercepted before publication. Security teams were quietly strengthened. Those precautions proved necessary. In late 2025, cybersecurity consultants connected to Edward's office identified attempts to map the estate's perimeter using remote aerial devices. Trail cameras were discovered near woodland access points. None penetrated the property's inner grounds. The measures were discreetly neutralized. Even Prince Edward found himself drawn into the final stages of tension. In November 2025, an appeal was reportedly made to postpone the public confirmation in the interest of family harmony. His reply, according to those familiar with the exchange, was direct. His daughter's role was not symbolic nor temporary. That ended the debate. The deed stood. The will remained sealed. And for the first time since the passing of Queen Elizabeth II, the balance of influence around one of her most personal legacies shifted irrevocably. There was no celebration, no triumphant display, only the quiet certainty that the late monarch's final decision had taken effect, exactly as she intended. But it did not end there. A week after the inheritance became public, something small, almost quiet, shifted the atmosphere again. On the 6th of February, Lady Louise Windsor stepped into St. Columb's Chapel, an old stone church tucked along a narrow lane a few miles from the secluded estate. The chapel had stood there for centuries, its walls weathered by wind and rain, its wooden pews polished by generations of hands. She arrived without ceremony. No press line waited outside. No motorcade blocked the road. One vehicle dropped her off and left. She walked the final stretch alone, coat buttoned against the cold. But there was one detail no one missed. Pinned to her navy lapel was a brooch unfamiliar even to seasoned royal watchers. It was delicate but distinct, a wreath of Scottish heather woven around an English rose, joined at the center by a tiny sapphire shaped like a shield. On the back, later revealed through careful photography, were 4 engraved words: "Steadfast beyond applause." Historians quickly recognized the phrase. It had appeared in private notes written by Queen Elizabeth II to a small circle of family members, including Princess Anne and Prince Philip. It was never used publicly. It was not a slogan. It was a reminder. The message was unmistakable. Inside the chapel, Louise placed a modest arrangement of white flowers beneath a simple memorial plaque dedicated to her grandmother's decades of service. There were perhaps 40 people present, local parish members and volunteers attending what had been described as a small community fundraiser. Then she spoke. Her voice was calm, clear, and steady. "The Crown entrusted this place to me," she began, "is not a prize to display. It is a responsibility to protect. I hold it not because of position, but because of what I was taught, that service is strongest when it is quiet." She paused, glancing not toward the few cameras at the back, but toward the altar. "We cannot reshape memory to suit convenience. We safeguard it with care, even when it asks for patience rather than praise." The clip of her remarks spread rapidly across social media platforms.
Every day, and I do not know how he managed to do that, but he would also tell me all sorts of anecdotes.
Within hours, it became one of the most replayed royal moments of the year. When she finished speaking, she inclined her head toward the engraved stone bearing one of her grandmother's reflections. "That duty gives purpose to power, not the other way around." The symbolism was clear without being dramatic. Later that evening, Princess Anne released a rare public note of her own. It was brief. "Lady Louise does not speak for ambition," it read. "She speaks for continuity." The reaction was immediate. King Charles III quietly cleared 2 engagements from his calendar and returned to Scotland for private discussions with Prince Edward. Meanwhile, Queen Camilla was photographed entering Clarence house without comment, her expression guarded. An observer later remarked that many had assumed the family would present a united front behind the scenes. Instead, unity appeared to settle around Louise. Headlines followed swiftly. "Quiet resolve redefines royal strength. A new voice without the noise." Even Catherine, Princess of Wales, added her voice subtly. She posted a handwritten message online. "Inheritance is not ownership, it is stewardship." The post gathered millions of reactions within an hour. Behind palace walls, the shift was palpable. Advisors within St. James's Palace convened to assess the broader implications. Louise's role, though unofficial in title, was taking on cultural significance that extended beyond formal hierarchy. Notably, Prince William, Prince of Wales, was said to view the moment not as competition, but as reinforcement. According to a senior aide, he remarked privately that she was embodying the principles they had all been raised to respect. For many observers, Lady Louise had evolved from reserved granddaughter to moral anchor, someone articulating an idea of royalty rooted in restraint rather than visibility. But momentum rarely moves unchallenged. Within days, Queen Camilla unveiled a new public initiative titled Service in the Modern Age. The launch was held in the grand surroundings of Windsor Castle, in one of its most historic halls. The exhibition celebrated contemporary royal engagement, featuring photographs, recorded speeches, and testimonials highlighting her charitable commitments. The timing raised eyebrows. It was announced less than an hour after details emerged about a collaborative archival project between Louise and Princess Anne, focused on preserving lesser-known aspects of mid-20th century royal history.
What size is this bear? Big! Big! This is a big bear.
Camilla's speech emphasized visibility. Service, she stated, must be seen to be understood. The contrast was stark. Princess Anne, when asked by reporters to comment, responded simply, "Understanding does not always require spectacle." The king did not attend the exhibition opening, citing a previously scheduled medical review. Attendance was limited to secondary family members and invited guests. Public reaction proved muted. Critics described the display as polished but impersonal. Online commentary compared it unfavorably to the authenticity of Louise's chapel address. Then, Catherine shared another post, this time a candid image of Louise and Anne seated at a long wooden table surrounded by archival boxes. The caption read, "Preserving quietly." Engagement numbers surged again. Tension eventually surfaced more directly. According to accounts from those present, a private exchange occurred between Camilla and Princess Anne in a corridor at Windsor. Voices were controlled but firm. Camilla reportedly suggested that Louise's rising profile had been encouraged deliberately. Anne's reply was measured. "Public respect," she said, "cannot be manufactured. It must be earned." The conversation ended without resolution. Within a week, Camilla's exhibition closed earlier than expected, officially attributed to scheduling adjustments within the castle. No further explanation was offered. Soon after, the royal website introduced a new feature page titled Enduring Service: The Unseen Years. It highlighted personal letters, quiet initiatives, and stories of dedication rarely covered by headlines. The project was credited to Lady Louise Windsor and Princess Anne. At the top of the page appeared a line attributed to Queen Elizabeth II, "Dignity outlasts display." The shift was unmistakable. Without open confrontation, the narrative had changed direction. The institution itself appeared to absorb and reflect the message Louise had delivered in that small stone chapel, that strength lies not in performance, but in constancy. And in the echoing corridors of palaces old and new, one truth settled in: influence, when grounded in sincerity, speaks louder than any spotlight ever could. And this was seen when major newspapers began describing Lady Louise Windsor as the late Queen's spiritual successor, not in law, not in rank, but in character. Commentators called her the steady pulse of the monarchy, proof that influence does not always need volume. In a world of constant headlines, her restraint stood out. Universities quickly took notice. Invitations arrived from University of Oxford and University of Cambridge, asking her to speak about responsibility and modern leadership. Even Harvard University reached out with a formal request for a lecture on heritage and public ethics. For someone who had once avoided attention, the attention was now impossible to ignore. Then came a result that surprised even palace aides and everyone else. On February 5th, a survey released by BBC showed that 71% of people in the United Kingdom believed Louise should receive a formal royal title if she chose to take on public duties. In Scotland, support was even stronger, climbing to 84%. The numbers were clear. Public trust in her was growing fast. 2 days later, Buckingham Palace confirmed that King Charles III had privately offered her elevation to Her Royal Highness Princess Louise, along with a defined role focused on youth development, cultural preservation, and civic education. But the offer came with conditions. She would need to divide her time between Scotland and London. She would accept full-time security. She would undergo formal briefings and official oversight, and she would have to give up outside professional interests, including the equestrian coaching she quietly loved. Inside the family, opinions were mixed. Princess Anne supported the idea, but warned that identity must come before image. Sophie, Duchess of Edinburgh, worried less about status and more about pressure. A title, she said privately, carries an expectation that never sleeps. Then tension flared from across the Atlantic. On February 10th, Meghan Markle appeared on an American talk show
Ooh, and I have to ask you about Suits every time
and made a pointed comment about people being rewarded for quiet branding instead of visible service. She did not mention Louise by name, but the connection was obvious. Social media reacted immediately. Hashtags questioning the meaning of silence began trending worldwide. The following day, Princess Anne and Prince Edward released a joint statement. It was calm and direct. Louise had never pursued position or platform. She had accepted tasks when needed and stepped back when not. Nothing more. Public opinion swung quickly. Many viewed the criticism as unnecessary. Sympathy for Louise deepened. On February 14, standing outside the Highland estate in falling snow, Louise made her own announcement. She introduced the Grey House Trust, an independent foundation that would protect historical archives while also supporting young leaders who serve without recognition. Leadership, she said, is not about being seen. It is about being steady. More than 9 million viewers watched the broadcast. When asked whether she would accept the princess title, she paused before answering. She expressed gratitude for the king's confidence, but explained that duty does not depend on rank. For now, she said, she would remain Lady Louise. Days later, the king sent her a handwritten letter, a rare gesture. According to aides, he wrote that her grandmother had believed true strength grows quietly. Louise replied with equal grace, saying she did not seek crowns, only purpose. By mid-February, observers agreed that something had shifted. A new center of moral gravity had formed within the royal family. On one side stood visibility and image, on the other stood patience and principle. And as of today, the public had given her an informal name, Guardian of Grey House. Because in the end, this story was never really about titles or land. It was about serving without applause, protecting without complaint, choosing dignity when noise would have been easier. Lady Louise did not inherit a throne. She inherited what makes one matter, and that is an identity. Do you believe Lady Louise's quiet rise marks a real shift in the future of the monarchy? Could her refusal of titles and focus on duty reshape what royal leadership looks like in the years ahead? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and make sure you click on the next video appearing on your screen. You definitely won't want to miss what we uncover next.